Welcome everyone to today's webinar. I am Ayla Ellison, editor with Becker's Hospital Review. We will begin today's webinar with a presentation and we'll have time at the end of the hour for a question and answer session. You can submit any questions you have throughout the webinar by typing them into your control panel in the space labeled Enter a Question for Staff and clicking Send. We are looking forward to hearing your questions. Additionally, in about a week following the webinar, we will be sending you a copy of the presentation to the email you used to register. At this time, it is now my pleasure to start today's webinar by introducing our presenter. Joe McMurray, CPA, is the Vice President of Patient Experience of Zotec Partners. He is an expert in all specialties the company services, specifically responsible for executing Zotec's strategic goals related to call center performance and overall patient experience, directing the company's call centers, and overseeing all facets of patient payment posting. Joe graduated from Indiana University Bloomington with a Bachelor of Science degree in Accounting and Finance. Joe, I'll now turn the floor over to you to begin today's presentation.
Thank you, and thanks for joining us today as we discuss how technology and new patient experience methods can impact your self-pay patient populations and the growing number of patients who have high deductible health plans. All right, so first let's walk through what we'll cover during today's discussions. So first up, we'll talk about market changes and how it's transforming what was once traditionally a business-to-business healthcare to now business-to-consumer. We'll talk about statistics around the increasing number of high-deductible health plans and the impact that's having on bad debt. We'll talk about the new model of healthcare. We'll touch on some collection strategies for the new patient consumer. And we'll talk about propensities and responsibilities. And then we'll touch on some effective follow-up campaigns and the important movement to mobile. Let's get started. Transformation to consumer health and how the market is changing. Healthcare providers are becoming increasingly aware that today's patients have more control over how they obtain their care and how they pay for it. This is why many providers now aptly view patients as consumers. Given patients choices for high deductible healthcare plans, access to mobile health, and their need for transparency in price and quality. The greatest impact today is the big shift from business-to-business healthcare to business-to-consumer healthcare. And the increasing prevalence of high-deductible health plans has had a material impact on the revenue cycle process, as these plans characterize a major shift in whose responsibility it is to pay. According to Crowe-Horwath's first quarter 2015 edition of hospital benchmarking data, prior to the shift to high deductible health plans, roughly 80% of medical expenses will be covered by the carrier. With patients now accountable for, on average, the first $1,200 of their medical expenses, it's no surprise that bad debt is on the rise. This trend underscores the need for providers to implement effective solutions that can enhance the patient-consumer collections process and also safeguard the revenue cycle by making the experience as effortless as possible. The key to an effortless patient experience is simplicity, intuitive design, and crafting experiences that make sense to different types of patients, meaning one size fits all is no longer the best practice. So as we touched on, this industry used to be all about the physician-to-carrier relationship, where physicians work directly with insurance companies to obtain payments for services rendered, and with little to no interaction with the patient. One might say this was the good old days. In fact, physician groups have traditionally operated in a business-to-business model where patient bills were paid largely by various government and private insurance payers. Physicians previously knew who to bill and what to expect in the way of payment from payers. But today the landscape has transformed. We're now seeing trends that point to significantly more interaction between the physician and the patient. Insurance carriers are seeing more consumers enrolling in high deductible health plans in which they, the patient, are responsible for a significantly greater share of their healthcare costs. So the business has transformed. It's now physician to patient, or a consumer relationship. Providers need to be acutely aware of this and must transform their organization in such a way that they excel at the ability to connect, bill, and collect from thousands of individual payers, rather than, say, scores of corporate payers. Since the advent of the health savings account in 2003, deductibles have increased as employers resist escalating premiums. According to the Kaiser Family Foundation, the percentage of covered workers with deductibles of $1,000 or more rose from 10% in 2006 to 46% in 2015, a significant increase and no slowdown in sight. Looking at the number of people enrolled in high deductible health plans, there's been a tenfold increase in the past 7 years to more than 11.4 million people, and it's steadily growing. High deductible health plans are a driving contributor of the 68% increase in patient payment liability from $250 billion in 2009 to $420 billion in 2015. Among covered workers with a general annual deductible, the average deductible for single coverage in 2015 was $1,318, up from $917 in 2010. This trend isn't expected to cease either, with average annual growth of out-of-pocket healthcare expenditures projected to rise from 3.2% in 2013 to 5.5% by the year 2023. The orange shading represents the bad debt trend, and it paints a very similar story. As discussed previously with the data from Crowe-Horwath, patients on average are responsible for the first $1,200, and this is driving an increase in bad debt. So it's imperative, again, that we get ahead of this and implement methods of collection that meet the needs of the patient consumer to help mitigate the risk of bad debt. The patient experience must be as close to effortless as possible to achieve the desired result. We must not make the patient work to pay us. So in comes the new model of healthcare to the rescue. With patients now more and more relying on their time-tested consumer behaviors and tendencies, so AKA they will complain, they will ask for discounts, they will want or demand an experience that they get with retail or service industries, and applying them to the healthcare industry. So it's incumbent upon us to meet the consumers where they are and not make them work to get to us. Going back to the notion that this business has transformed into a physician-to-patient relationship, consumers are now forced to be consumers. And consumers want to have that same Amazon or Uber or Starbucks or Google search experience that they're used to. And they want it with their healthcare. If they don't get it, they'll seek out other options that will provide it. So unfortunately, patients want and they don't want what you see on the screen. Essentially, again, emphasizing the fact that one size does not fit all. So the revenue cycle is analogous to a retailer's checkout process in that it can either increase or decrease the likelihood of future encounters. Even more so given that these relationships are more emotionally charged due to the circumstances compared to, say, buying groceries or taking a ride with Uber. The new patient consumer requires a more integrated approach in their interactions with the providers. Therefore, the patient experience can and should be akin to a customer relationship management strategy that many retail and service-driven businesses employ. This rapid shift to out-of-pocket healthcare expenditures is truly worrisome because the payment methodologies and systems that are used by many providers today are outdated and inconvenient, to say the least, when it comes to payment transactions among the self-pay after insurance patient population. Of the $2.7 trillion the country spends annually on healthcare, $400 billion goes to claims processing, payments, billing, revenue cycle management, and bad debt, in part because half of all payer-provider transactions involve outdated manual methods such as phone calls and mailings. Providers must be more diligent as they take on the patient-consumer population, creating new and better ways to make patient bills more understandable with easier and more accessible payment options. At Zotec, we touch the patient multiple times and through multiple channels in order to follow up for payment. Our aim is to provide as close to an effortless experience as possible by meeting the patient consumer where they are, whether it's through text messages, outbound phone calls, or mail, or other channels. We provide them with an easy-to-use self-service options through their mobile device, their tablet, their desktop, and always providing the option to speak to a live customer service representative to answer their questions. Again, we want to meet them where they are and provide as many options as possible. So jumping back a bit and touching more on what I mentioned previously on meeting the patient consumers where they are, it's imperative that you determine which options work best for each patient. The industry is abuzz over predictive analytics that give providers the optimal ability to collect payment from the new patient consumer population. This approach involves the ability to accurately forecast propensity to pay for patients that are covered by high deductible health plans. All of this based on geographic, demographic, and historical payment data. It's important to note that these methods deviate from seeking out the traditional credit score. In part, it's important to realize that up to 25% of the patient pay revenue can come from households that have no or thin credit bureau files, which obviously can make this fall outside of the capabilities of a credit-based scoring model because they are essentially unscorable. Credit scores, while addressing consumer debt and purchasing behaviors, cannot be compared to medical debt. So in comes data, and we love data. Data helps us minimize or eliminate gut reactions and personal bias from business decisions because it provides answers in black and white. By using data to calculate a patient's propensity to pay, healthcare providers can determine which collection strategy will yield the highest return on investment. There are millions of data elements that are generated each year, including social data, demographic information, social patterns, clinical data, and buying patterns, including when patients like to pay their bills. As the healthcare industry becomes more focused on meeting the demands of consumer behaviors, understanding patients' tendencies toward payment is increasingly central to revenue cycle management and collections. Zotec Partners uses a platform that draws from troves of data to similarly create personas, which you see on the screen, of individuals in order to optimize the revenue cycle. By analyzing individual personas, providers can determine an individual's propensity to pay or their propensity for friction. Knowing these patient tendencies ahead of time allows providers to tailor billing interactions and collection techniques to the individuals to minimize friction in making payments and to maximize collections. So for example, a patient's demographics can suggest the likelihood that he or she will respond to a text message notification about medical bills versus, say, receiving paper statements in the mail. An elderly patient may not be as technologically savvy as a patient who is a younger, say, Gen Y parent. So for the elderly patient, the paper statement or the phone call might work better based on payment history and demographic data. Whereas for the younger patient, we might be better served to employ a mobile strategy to collect payment. So on screen are 3 quick examples of personas with Maria, James, and Yoon. These examples of personas represent the types of patients you will interact with and bill. So it's critical that you understand their concerns, their characteristics, their goals, all in the method of being able to craft a better experience for them that will lead to more effective collections with far less friction, and complaints. So we've established that providers have an incredible opportunity to fully engage patients to make payments through multiple channels, especially given today's evolving technology and data mining capabilities. But it's also possible to determine a patient's propensity for friction. Friction is any time that there is an issue getting a clean claim, appropriate adjudication, or being paid appropriately. So examples of this could be a patient makes an inbound call with a question. It could also be if the payer doesn't pay what they were contracted to pay. If there's a need to refile claims, a bad address that comes via the patient, or an error in the registration process, an RFI back to the provider to clarify what was provided, or an inappropriate denial. These are all examples of friction. So we analyze all of these items and come up with a probability of friction. So what we're doing is taking it across the healthcare continuum of the patient, the carrier, and the physician. Each of them individually and collectively create friction. So first you have the patient personas that I mentioned earlier and their propensity to pay or their propensity to complain. You have carrier personas. So we want to know, are they an electronic carrier? Do they have a large historical propensity to deny? What's the carrier percentage of allowed? The physician personas can also contribute to the probability of friction. So denial percentage documentation. Is there a specialty issue? Is there an ICD-10 pattern of issues? All of this together gives you the overall probability of friction and puts you in a position to understand the potential problem and create paths to eliminate the friction, improve the patient experience, and increase your collections. So propensity for friction also goes to the ultimate amount that the patient is going to pay. On the carrier or payer side, we know the projected percentage of allowed, and for the patient, we know what their trended responsibility is as a percentage of allowed. So an upfront estimation can be made, and you can craft an experience for your self-pay after insurance patients to avoid or say tiptoe around friction, such as the patient calling multiple times and or complaining via another medium such as social media. So next is propensity to pay. So on screen are some of the elements that go into the overall propensity to pay for a patient. This is where the art or crafting experiences meets the science, so to speak, in that you may have a patient who has a high willingness to pay their medical bill, but their ability to pay based on social economic data would say there is potential for risk or friction. So you can customize your collection process and craft an experience of offering a payment plan or potentially a discount for prompt payment depending on their situation. And maybe you might do it right there at the time of service. The key point here is that I would certainly caution providers against investing a lot of time and effort on collecting from patients that are predicted to pay. You want to know that you're putting your efforts on the right patients based on what is reflected in each patient's expected collection amount and his/her risk or propensity to complain. It's critical that we always minimize complaints. And so by giving patients the capacity to immediately pay their bills anytime and from anywhere, and using a collection strategy that works for the patient, providers have the ability to collect and post payments faster and more effectively without manual processing errors. So on the previous screen, we discussed some of the data points that go into propensity to pay. And this screen shows the stratification of all data elements relative to the propensity to pay. The highlighted items are the most statistically significant data points when you go through and break it down into the guarantor propensity for payment. So we take all of that data, we put it into the magic 8-ball, we shake it up a couple times, and out comes what the patient's propensity to pay is shown here. Now, obviously, I'm kidding when I say that, but if you aren't a data scientist, it may seem that way at first when you review the information. So quickly, the first one across the top, or excuse me, on the left, we show the category by specialty, by procedure, by carrier type, as well as crucial demographics about the patient's age, their gender, population, race, average income, etc. On the right, you see the highlighted what each patient's propensity to pay percentage is. So for example, the first one across the top is an emergency anesthesia procedure. It's a Medicaid patient, and you can see off to the right that there's a 1.05% chance of being paid for that specific patient. Certainly not the best odds. So in the middle, you have true self-pay patients that have a history of payment with us, which significantly improves the likelihood of future payments. And they have a 90% propensity to pay because of this. So you wouldn't want to assume the worst of them and just write them off. Essentially, this provides you very powerful data, and it allows you to make data-driven decisions to be more efficient and effective with your collection efforts. Just zoomed in there for those of us not blessed with eagle vision on this presentation, so you can see that. All right, so jumping back to the important concept of friction again, this example dashboard showcases the amount of payments you receive after a friction event. And so remember that a friction event could be an inbound phone call, an eligibility 271 check, refiling claims, etc. So it's critical that you track this information so you can see the impact of the initiatives that you put in place around improving it. So for example, the friction of refiling claims. An initiative around improving the registration process or changes the cross-referencing of carriers would allow you to see the impact of such initiatives. So again, very powerful information, data, that allows you to make data-driven decisions and see the results of your process improvement efforts. All right, so finally, let's discuss the movement to mobile. So according to a Pew Research survey in late 2015, 68% of adults in the United States currently own a smartphone, and this is up from 35% 4 years ago. Since it's the second half of 2016, I think it's probably safe to assume that number is most likely higher than 68% now. We also know that more and more Americans use their mobile phone to access the internet, and there's a fast-growing number that use their smartphone as the primary online device. I know that for me, I'm guilty of being attached to my smartphone and responding quickly to text messages and alerts. I'm guessing that I'm probably not alone on this phone call. So it's clear that the mobile phone is a strong contender as a key transforming agent in the future of health and healthcare. It provides another channel for us to communicate with our patients, and a very effective one at that. A great example of meeting the patient wherever they are and allowing them to make informed business decisions, act quickly, and move on with what they want to do. Moving closer to easy, convenient, effortless experiences. Technology is a key factor in crafting patient experiences. One such example is a follow-up texting campaigns, and these can impact the collections from high deductible health plans. On screen is an example of the text message campaign. It starts with a text message with a link to their statement, then a friendly reminder, a second reminder with a phone call, and then a final phone call before evaluating for write-off or sending to collections. But before you even start this campaign or any other campaign that you engage in, you would have used personas, and you'd know who you're billing. You would know their propensity to pay, their friction, and you would craft an experience to ensure that you're using the most appropriate and most effective follow-up campaign to reach that patient in a friction-free manner with little to no complaints. So by texting your patients, you can then customize the experience on the personas. So the idea here is not to tell you or to show you, for that matter, the best follow-up campaign, what it is, but to say that you should be mindful of who you are dealing with on a patient-by-patient basis so you can customize the patient experience to drive the best results. It's not just about the propensity to pay the bill, it's also about the propensity to complain. So if a patient group has a large propensity to complain, then the juice may not be worth the squeeze with regards to a hard or aggressive collection technique. That will essentially skew your overall complaint process and the quality measures that you use. So when you're out there working to predict what to do with this information, you must think through the entire process and what the impact could be to your organization as a whole. Technology is evolving at a rapid pace, and today's savvy patient consumer is accustomed to things being easy. Again, think back to Uber, Amazon, Starbucks, Google Search. Having access to mobile tools to manage information anywhere at any time. With mobile payment and text capabilities, patients are not only empowered and accountable to self-manage their balances, make payments or create payment plans, but they're also reminded of payment due dates. It is ultimately important to make the payment process convenient, easy to understand, and secure for the patient, while also increasing collections for your organization. It's important to understand that mobile payment technologies may not be valuable if you don't do the upfront work and establish your patient personas and their propensity to pay. Understanding your current and projected patient mix and gaining a distinct understanding of patient behaviors is absolutely critical. If that upfront effort isn't there, then you may see little to no improvement, especially if it's determined that your mobile payments are not the most viable or desired payment option for your patient mix. So in closing, providers have the ability to implement this process into their revenue cycle. The patient experience is now becoming one of the most critical pieces to what you do, and it cannot be overlooked given today's patient-consumer expectation trends. It's clear that there is a greater expectation for a personalized experience in healthcare, and healthcare technologies that seek to know each patient, remember their preferences, and engage with them effectively and via communication channels they're used to in their daily life, those will be at the forefront of taking patient care to its next inevitable level. On the patient side of the equation, Zotec has developed online and mobile billing tools that are optimally suited to today's increasingly retail-oriented healthcare payment environment. But on the physician side, we're also able to use predictive analytics to determine patient proclivities ahead of time in order to obtain a firm understanding of who they are and what they like, understanding their concerns, understanding their characteristics, and understanding their goals. All of this could lead to understanding whether or not they have a preference for mobile tools, for example. So leveraging technology, making data-driven decisions, and crafting experiences can help providers increase their collections, reduce days in AR, and improve their patient satisfaction ratings, given the shift to a more consumer-oriented healthcare. So I'd like to thank you all again for joining me today, and we can open it up for questions.
Well, thank you, Joe, for that fantastic presentation. We will now begin today's question and answer session. So please submit any questions you have by typing them into your control panel in the space labeled Enter a Question for Staff and clicking Send. We will try to get through as many questions as we have time for. So we'll go ahead and jump into the first question, and that is, how can groups ensure patient privacy is considered with new follow-up and patient experience methods?
All right, great question. I think balance between patient experience and patient privacy security should always be front and center. We know mobile delivers on the patient experience side, and in many ways, mobile is more secure as payment providers use GPS and other technologies that can better determine that legitimate transactions are occurring. So essentially, the data that surrounds a mobile payment can be utilized to protect patients in more ways than what would be found, say, with a plastic credit card. And also, when it comes to patient interaction, whether it's texting or outbound calls or any outreach that you do, you want to make sure that you ensure that you're always complying with TCPA and the latest FCC regulations. Another critical area that I would note there too would be to focus on secure online patient portals. You want to make sure that you're working with an IT security group that can create compliance and safety measures around these portals, as it's critical, when you're offering this, that you offer the utmost privacy and security when it comes to them using your services.
Well, thank you, Joe, for your insight on that. And the next question, the audience member is asking, besides analyzing patients' propensity to pay and assuming they'll make the payments, what are some newer billing/collection methods that ensure physical payment from patients, making payment easier and more convenient?
Got it. So I would say, the ACA has brought about, obviously, increased patient responsibility, and that's specifically with self-pay after insurance patients, many of whom have high deductible health plans, and in conjunction with that, they have a health savings account. So one way that Zotec navigates this area is to offer them the ability to auto-deduct money from their health savings accounts, similar to how they might pay a utility bill at home. And in that same vein, we give them the option to set up automatic payments or create payment plans when they don't have the ability to pay one large lump sum. So truly the best way to really ensure payment is to give patients as many options as possible, so that when you're assessing their propensity to pay based on the demographic or individual persona, you also give them a variety of convenient options to choose from. So that they may or may not use the same method each time. So maybe a patient with a higher propensity to pay, if we follow up with them using a mobile method, but if they're not in front of their, maybe they're in front of their laptop, so they may choose to log in and to use the patient portal website, to view their medical bill, as opposed to making that mobile payment. So it's truly about convenience and giving patients options. Again, meeting them where they are.
Thank you so much, Joe. And we're getting a lot of questions from audience members, so we'll go ahead and move on to the next one, which is millennials may respond to the text for payments, but how do you interact with the Gen X and baby boomers who may have trouble understanding increased patient responsibilities?
Yeah, so to me, this is very similar to what you're probably encountering in your workforce or in your office, right? You have millennials, you have Gen Xers, you have boomers, you have the silent generation potentially, as well as maybe Gen Z as well that's mixed into that. And how you manage them, how you communicate with them on the job most likely varies to some degree, so that way you can get the best out of them in the workplace. And I would say that along that same line, there's no payment technology or no payment technology is valuable if you don't analyze your current and projected patient mix, right, and gain an understanding of their behaviors. So each patient has their own preferences. So it's important to keep in mind that there may be Gen X or baby boomer patients that are tech and mobile savvy. So you'd essentially want to analyze the historical data, determine each patient's propensity to pay or complain, so that you can then reach out to them in a variety of methods, and those methods may include the more traditional route if you find that that's a better way to reach out to them. So a more traditional method would be to provide them with an easy to understand statement that helps them better understand what's owed, what the insurance company paid or didn't pay, and their increased payment responsibility. So it's clear that patients have become increasingly frustrated, right, by confusing medical bills. So giving them something that is easy to read and understand is kind of the first step in reaching out to what I call the more traditional patient populations. Other options, say getting them on the phone. So there's advanced interactive voice recognition technology or IVR or phone menu, as some may refer to it. That's been a very proven method that, and we employ that here at Zotec to collect from these populations. The human touch is also a big piece on this in delivering personalized customer service. It's one of the best ways that you can actually help this particular demographic understand their bill and make payments. At Zotec, we have a call center that fields calls from patients 24/7 with local representatives that speak clearly to the patients with them about the bills and assist with making payments and taking other actions.
Well, thank you, Joe, for your insight on that. And the next question from the audience, they're asking, can you talk a little bit about the requirements for being able to text/audio dial patients? Do we need a written agreement from the patient to do this?
That's a great question. Yeah, so around the rules of being able to text or send outbound calls, right? Yeah, there's a lot of case law that's out there on that where it's implied consent. So when the patient provides their mobile number at the time of service, there's implied consent for you to be able to reach out and communicate with them via text message. Again, going back to, it's important to make sure that you're following all the regulations and providing the stop and the help and all of that, integrating that into your system to make sure that when, if they choose not to be communicated in that fashion, that you honor that request.
Well, thank you for clarifying that. And outside of the next question is asked, outside of text messaging, is there anything else that tech-savvy patients are looking for?
Yeah. So I think going back to one of the slides on the presentation, right? There is, with every patient, and they're all different, right? Again, one size doesn't fit all. So there's any number of avenues that you can take with them. There are a lot of people that appreciate e-statements via email. There's a lot of folks that really like just paper statements. And again, this goes back to the propensity to pay, the propensity for friction, and coordinating those together so that way you're communicating with your patients the way that they want to be communicated with. And the data that you gather as you're going through this will tell you the story of how to interact with them.
Well, great. Thank you very much for your insight on that. And it looks like we just got another question from an audience member, and it says, with this strong move to online and mobile payments, is there any concern in what can be done to ensure all patient data is secure and HIPAA compliant?
Yeah, great question. And that's, I kind of touched on that a little bit, right? Where with the portals, you want to make sure that you're using an IT security group to go through that process with you to make sure that you're firing on all cylinders when it comes to security. With your call center, right, if you're taking calls and going through that process, you want to make sure that your agents are trained on the importance of HIPAA, right? And that's one thing we always talk about. When a patient calls in, HIPAA is the only thing that's important, right off the bat. You want to make sure that you do that. Because it's really the only thing that you can't fix, technically, so to speak. So So I hope that answers the question.
Oh, yes, absolutely. I was just waiting to make sure you're finished with your answer there. And we're moving on through the questions, and thank you all for submitting them as we move through the Q&A session. And this one just, the audience member is asking, can you recommend a methodology for asking patients to pay deductibles and coinsurance amounts prior to large procedures such as surgery? And is it better to collect the entire amount you think you'll be due and risk the patient canceling the surgery, or collect $500 or something? And are you seeing any trends for success with this?
Yeah, so I would say that, from my perspective, that would be an individual practice's choice, but it's something that we highly recommend.
Okay, great. Well, it looks like we have time for a few more questions, so please keep sending them in if you have any more questions. The next audience member asks, how quick is the turnaround time to score your patient?
Yeah, so I would say it's almost immediate, right? As you're working through and you start to establish what these cohorts are based on demographics, social patterns, those kind of things, you're coming up with that score immediately, and so you'd know exactly what to do. So based on their demographic information that they provide, based on the historical payment data that you have for someone of a like circumstance or position, you'd have that information immediately, and that kind of touches a little bit on their at the time of service being able to either offer them, a payment plan or something to that effect, that you have that flexibility to be able to discuss that with them right away.
Great, thank you so much for clarifying that. And moving on to the next question is, how do you recommend that providers adhere to providing truth and lending disclosures when initiating installment plans? So did you get the question okay?
Yeah, I'm sorry, could you repeat that again? It broke up.
Oh, absolutely. The question is, how do you recommend that providers adhere to providing truth and lending disclosures when initiating installment plans?
Yeah, I can't say that I'm probably the best person to answer that question, but I can certainly find an answer to that. We could provide that after the presentation. My apologies.
Oh, well, great, and you have the opportunity to do that, so thank you so much. And it looks like we're about out of time for questions today, so I do want to thank Joe for his excellent presentation and to our audience for participating today. Enjoy the rest of your day, and we look forward to having you join us for future webinars.